Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7. So we're continuing our look at the movies that inspired Larry and Jon Kasdan in their creation of Solo, a Star Wars story, as part of Safe Week. This would be, of course, the 2 weeks, actually, as it turns out, that we are within the bubble of information about Solo. It's all out there. It's all stuff that you can hear now because the embargo's lifted and all that fun stuff. But hey, you still want a dose of Star Wars joy in your life, right? So let's talk about the things that we can talk about, like, for example, the movies that Larry and Jon Kasdan have cited as inspiration. And today we're talking about Unforgiven, which is the Clint Eastwood Western, and it was directed by him, starring him, and written by David Webb Peoples. It is the story of William Money, who is a reformed bad guy. And I guess I should tell you at this point, this is a full spoiler podcast for Unforgiven. So if you haven't seen the movie and don't want it spoiled for you, well then, hey, watch this at a later date and give Unforgiven a shot. It is an award-winning motion picture after all, and so hey, it's probably worth your time. Now, there's an interview in Entertainment Weekly that we've been referencing over the last couple of days, and it's Anthony Breznican's article, and in this case he's interviewing Jon Kasdan, who says that there's a feeling in Unforgiven between the kid and Clint Eastwood's character that hits upon that sort of apprentice gunslinger relationship that they were interested in, but he freely admits that it's a much darker movie by comparison than Solo, a Star Wars story. And the picture that accompanies this article is of Clint Eastwood with his 2 children in the movie, but that's not the kid that I think that Jon Kasdan is talking about here. It's actually the Schofield Kid who we're talking about in this particular case. And that's a kid who happens to come to William Money's farm, Clint Eastwood's farm, saying, hey, are you, this William Money who used to be such a bad guy, and I'm looking to go kill these guys, and I could use a partner, and want you to come along. And Money says, I don't do that anymore, because he's reformed. He got married, his wife reformed him, got him to kick the alcohol and abusing animals and all this stuff, and so he's not going to do that sort of thing anymore. But he realizes that they're not making a heck of a lot of money as pig farmers, and he wants to do something right to set up his kids for a better life. And so he decides to take one last job. You know how that goes, taking one last job. And so he ultimately decides to go track the Schofield Kid down along with his partner of old. That would be Ned, played by Morgan Freeman. And the 3 of them go together to try to collect the money for this particular job. Now, let's talk about what the job is briefly. There's a cowboy who in the town of Big Whiskey got very rough with a woman and cut her up, and unfortunately, all that happens to him in the name of justice is that he gets fined for 5 of his ponies, and the guy that he was hanging around with, he gets fined 2 of his ponies, and that's all there is to it. And the women who associate with this poor woman who got cut up, obviously they feel justice has not been served, and so they pool their money together to try and hire anyone they can to deliver Old West justice to these bad cowboys. And this doesn't sit well with the sheriff in town, who, when the bad assassins start showing up in town trying to collect the bounty, the sheriff starts beating all these guys up, and it creates all sorts of problems and that sort of thing. But what we're really here to talk about is the relationship between Clint Eastwood's character, Bill Money, and the Schofield Kid, whose name we don't actually find out other than just he's the Schofield Kid, on account of the type of gun that he carries. Now, he claims that he has killed 5 people before, but it turns out that that is not actually the case. He kills his first man while he is working with Clint Eastwood in the movie. And now, the Schofield Kid has heard a lot about William Money, and of course wants to talk to him about the things that he's heard about this notorious, let's see if I can say it right, notorious murderer. And, we'll ask him, I heard that they had the drop on you and multiple deputies and all this, that, and the other. And surprise, surprise, of course, Clint Eastwood's character does not particularly care to talk about this stuff. At one point, the most he will say about any of this is that he doesn't really remember because he was drunk most of the time. And it's an odd kind of mentorship, if you will, when, Jon Kasdan talks about an apprentice/gunslinger relationship. And you know what? He's not really saying that exactly, because that's sort of put in brackets. And so Anthony Breznican is kind of filling in the gaps for us a little bit there. But the way that Clint Eastwood is mentoring is kind of a real hands-off attitude situation where he gets the kid in a position where he can kill one of these cowboys and says, all right, go on, like the kid's going, I want to kill this guy. And it's like, all right, you can kill him, for God's sake. And so the kid gets the opportunity to kill the cowboy that cut up this girl, and he pulls it off. But after the fact, after they get away, he's at first thrilled about it, like, oh, was it always like this? Was it smoke and bullets flying? And Clint Eastwood's, again, I can't remember. I was drunk most of the time, and suddenly the kid's just breaking down, can't believe what he's done. And they were kind of foreshadowing this to begin with between, the conversations that Clint Eastwood and Morgan Freeman were having about, it's something to kill a man. It's a really big deal. And the Schofield Kid, he says, I'm not like you. Like, he comes to realize that fact. And of course, you have to wonder whether Clint Eastwood already knew that about him. I think the answer is pretty much yes, it is. And yet he had to let the kid make the mistake for himself, had to let him go kill a guy just to realize that it ain't all it's cracked up to be. And even early on, when the Schofield Kid is bragging and saying that he's already killed 5 people, while he's riding off, Ned and Clint Eastwood's character Bill, or William, have a quick conversation saying, you don't believe he's killed 5 people? No, they don't believe it. But they're not going to call him on it either. They're going to let it stand and see what comes out in the wash. And ultimately it does. Again, it's a real hands-off kind of mentorship relationship. So for us, that leaves the big question, which is how much of this can we look at and say, oh, this might inform Solo, a Star Wars story? Well, of course, we're focusing on the relationship between Woody Harrelson's character Tobias Beckett and Alden Ehrenreich's Han Solo. And you don't get the idea that Tobias is going to be the same kind of hands-off mentor, and he's not going to let the kid make a mistake and realize that he's not cut out for this thing and let him go. In fact, he tells Han Solo, if you go along with us for this, you're in this life for good. And Han says, yeah, that means yes. And of course, hard to say for sure everything is happening the way that we think it's happening, because you know how they slice trailers and commercials and all the other preview footage that we get. So that being said, even the dialogue itself, the fact that at some point Tobias Beckett is saying to Han that, if you're in for good, that's definitely not the way that Clint Eastwood played it with the Schofield Kid. There was no suggestion that once he goes this route that he can never go back. And I don't see Woody Harrelson's character being as reticent as Clint Eastwood's character in Solo, a Star Wars story. I can definitely see Woody Harrelson being a lot more forthcoming with his advice and mentorship ideas. And so, yeah, where do you draw the line with it, though? There's something about the feeling in that relationship that Jon Kasdan says that they wanted to capture, that they wanted to explore, that they wanted to be inspired by when they were working on Solo. So maybe it's going to turn out that Woody Harrelson's character Tobias Beckett is a much badder man than we yet realize based on the footage that we've seen so far. And it's going to come down to Han having to make a choice about whether he wants to stay with Tobias and his gang, or whether he wants to forge out on his own. Maybe the way that they're conducting business is not the way that Han ultimately wants to conduct business. I mean, there is still an idealism about Han, even though he is supposed to be heading down a darker path before ultimately he gets back on the right path when we see him in the sequel trilogy. And the sequel trilogy, what am I talking about? In the original trilogy, of course. So anyway, that right there is going to do it for our look at Unforgiven and the relationship between William Money and the Schofield Kid, which is serving as inspiration for Solo, a Star Wars story, and the relationship between Tobias Beckett and Han Solo. Now, over on the audio version of the podcast at sw7x7.com/iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts, I will be doing Last Jedi trivia over there, so please do check that out. But for this video, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.